I could build a spaceship.
Hello and welcome to Space Doc Jury Minisode number. What? I've given up counting now.
We've lost the ability to count over the course of this show.
We have. Yes. Anyway,
you passed 10 because that's you got.
We've definitely passed 10. Definitely passed 10. Anyway, I'm Lee.
I'm Andy.
This week we got a very special minisode because we're actually going to interview someone, which is Lee. Hello, Lee.
Hello, Lee.
Hello, Lee. This is going to go on for hours.
Shall I change my name to Lee to make it easier?
I think so.
All right.
It would.
Yeah, this is Lee Stringer, and basically, I'll tell you what.
Who's he?
Who's he? Yeah, who the hell's he? So, I'll tell you what, save me having to fumble all over IMDb. So, why don't you give everyone just a quick introduction of your back catalogue?
Back catalogue. Ooh.
Yeah.
Also, what you do, because the people have got no clue. You're just another Lee at the minute.
Yeah, you are Lee too.
Well, if I had actually been prepared, I would have done the little intro speech from Beetlejuice, explaining that he lived through the Black Death and studied at Juilliard and had a really good fun time, and he's seen The Exorcist about 167 times. But I always forget that a really, really good line that Michael Keaton does, and I don't want to balls it up by trying to impersonate it.
Oh.
But anyway, what have I did? Well, I used to work and still occasionally do work in visual effects.
Yep.
And I've been very fortunate and lucky and conniving to work my way into being lucky, to have worked on kind of pretty much all the cool stuff, one way or another. I've been very lucky.
Yeah.
I've worked on Star Trek. I've worked on a version of Star Wars, not the real one.
Yep.
But the animated Clone Wars. I've worked on Battlestar Galactica. I've worked with Jerry Anderson. I've worked on a Lego project and Battlestar Galactica. Did I already mention that one?
Yeah.
There was that space western thing, wasn't there? What was that?
Yeah, that Firefly.
There you go.
Which was, we could do a whole show just on that one.
Yeah.
I mean, it's still mind blowing. It's actually it's more. It's not still. It gets more mind blowing every year because it was half a season. We did 15 hours, and it seems to get more and more popular every year, and that doesn't happen very often. And it was. I mean, we knew it was kind of a fun show to be working on at the time, and we were actually hoping it would go further. And then it died, and I think it's. I hate to sound kind of morbid, but it's kind of got the Marilyn Monroe syndrome in that, kind of died young and has lived eternal. I know it sounds kind of weird, but it has. I got a feeling if it had actually run for 7 years and gone off the air successfully, by now everybody would have forgotten about it. But it didn't, and it's just kind of carried on.
It's 15
brilliant.
hours of joy and a lifetime of withdrawal instead.
Yeah, it is, and it's brilliant. It's amazing. I go to a science fiction convention and I just saw these people in brown coats and Jane hats and stuff, and it's amazing. It's amazing.
Wow.
I was at Dragon a few years ago, and I think there were more people in Firefly outfits than there were in Star Wars outfits, and I was just it was brilliant. So anyway, but I've worked on many other bits and pieces in between, and now I work. Directing episodes of an animated TV show about talking cats and dogs. So as you see, I've reached the pinnacle at this point. Yeah,
that's it. Forget all that Star Trek stuff and all that Battlestar Galactica stuff. Talking cats is where it's at.
Talking cats, exactly. No, it's a very fun show. It's based on a cell phone app, which is called Talking Tom, which has had at this point, I believe, 3 something big billion downloads with a B, which is also mind-blowing because I think that's like half the population of the world, which is ridiculous. It really is. I mean, obviously there's more than one app, but the combined downloads of all the apps is 3 point. And we get about 2 million views a week on our YouTube channel with our little 11-minute episodes that come out every Thursday.
Wow!
So look it up on YouTube. Yeah,
yeah, that's Talking Tom. Yes,
Talking Tom and Friends. It's called. Yeah.
We shall include the appropriate links.
The appropriate links
where you can
people
can look at this.
may even be hidden somewhere really hard to find, like talkingtomandfriends.com. But that will actually take you to the YouTube. It was actually created. There is I know we're meant to be talking about spaceships here, so I hope
that's okay. It's okay.
Trust me, these shows never stay on the rails for long, so it's fine.
Yeah. No, we've got to get back to spaceships because trust me, when you work about talking cats all day, it's like you want to talk about spaceships.
Oh dear.
That's why I come home and build them. No, it's I don't know. I've forgotten what I was talking about now. Anyway, Talking Tom and Friends. It's on YouTube. There's actually a thing, YouTube Kids, which is sort of YouTube is sort of heading into new territory, like most media is currently with Netflix and Amazon Prime and Hulu and everything else. And so, YouTube is effectively, they're not commissioning content like Netflix and Amazon Prime are doing, but they're doing sort of co-op deals with companies. And one of their sort of sub networks, as it were, that they're doing is called YouTube Kids, and there's a separate app for that, so that parents can basically put YouTube Kids on their iPad or their phone or whatever, and it only has certain content that the kids have access to, so they don't have to worry about them finding the weird shit that's on YouTube. And so Talking Tom was actually one of the launch channels, content for that YouTube Kids.
Wow!
So that's where it came from.
Nice.
And we're just coming to the end of producing the first season of 52 episodes, and we've already got a deal for another 52 episodes, and so that will take us for another couple of years of episodes. So I think there's almost 40. I think I'll be honest with you, I forget how many are actually already on YouTube. 35, 40 episodes, something like that. So
wow.
Anyway, go have a look. It's kind of fun, and there's 4 episodes of mine currently on there and doing well.
Excellent. So, okay, so you've done
spaceships.
Let's get back to spaceships. Let's just move the talking cats out the way, as attractive as they are. But the thing with spaceships, I mean, obviously you've done a lot. Star Wars, Star Trek, Jerry Anderson stuff, Firefly.
I think the only thing missing from your resume there was Babylon 5, and then you'd have had the full house.
Yeah, and I did not get to work on Babylon 5, but part of how I got into where I was because of Babylon 5, because the company that I worked at when I first moved to LA, what got me to move to LA. Actually, I did go and work in LA at a couple of other companies before that, but I didn't move to LA. I was kind of not wanting to move to LA, to be perfectly honest. But there was one particular company that who had pioneered CGI on TV with Babylon 5. There's a company called Foundation Imaging, and I had remember I was one of them. I'm the same as, to be honest, I'm the same as you or anybody else. I read Starlog magazines and whatever computer magazines there were at the time, and in the 80s and 70s, and starting with like Look-In in the 70s and whatever, and Starburst and Starlog and all that. Anyway, so in the 90s, there was this show, early 90s, that came up called Babylon 5, and I remember following it on the early bulletin boards online, and then watching the pilot on TV, and was blown away, and had read a bit about the making of this, and I was really starting to get into wanting to be interested in 3D at that time. Originally I wanted to be a model maker and build miniatures, but of course that changed very rapidly in the early 90s, and would see things like Jurassic Park, and then in the cinema, and see Babylon 5 on TV. And the thing is the computer needed to produce the effects in Jurassic Park cost about $250,000. By the way, I just moved to the US in the early 90s as well, so I'm talking dollars.
Yeah.
And the software needed to produce the effects was called Alias Power Animator, and that was another $250,000, which I didn't have at that time. And neither did the producers on Babylon 5. And so when they approached Ron Thornton and his partner Paul, basically to help produce the effects for Babylon 5, it was basically like, yeah, we don't have $500,000 to go and buy on one computer, on one piece of software, so they had to look for alternatives. And there was this thing called the Video Toaster, which plugged into the Commodore Amiga, which had a little piece of software added onto it called Lightwave, for doing, Lightwave was originally, I think, designed for doing like flying logos and things.
Right,
to add video effects, onto the Video Toaster, which was effectively a video switcher at the time. And the thing was, you could put together an Amiga with a toaster and some add-on bits, some extra memory and whatever for, I'm going to take a guess at about $4,000 or $5,000. So 1/100th of the cost of the same hardware that was being used at, say, ILM on Jurassic Park. And so for a TV budget, of course, that was affordable. And for somebody at home, it wasn't affordable, but it was at least possible. And so that kind of piqued my interest and got me in there. So anyway, I had got this company on my radar since the early 90s and sort of followed what they were doing on Babylon 5 and was like, I can do that, I think, maybe. And eventually I managed to actually meet one of the guys, their first employee, named Mojo. I met him at a sci-fi convention in Maryland in the mid-90s, and did the same thing that a lot of people do to me now, of kind of going, hey, I want to do what you do, and of course, he's like, yeah, kid, whatever, he said kid. I mean, he's like a year older than me, but
tell me he had a cigar when he said that as well.
Yeah, I think. I want to work in movies. Yeah, sure you do, kid. Yeah,
I like your maxi, kid. You got a lot of maxi.
So, but I was one of those few that kind of pestered him a little bit, and I managed to get his business card, and short version of the story, which has gone on for the last 10 minutes. I managed to get hired by Foundation Imaging in 1999, and moved out there to work on Star Trek Voyager, which was quite a rush, as it were. But so I didn't get to work on Babylon 5, but the company that I went to work for was the company that had done Babylon 5. So actually, I think the second day that I was there, I went like searching around the server looking for a folder called B5, which I found very quickly and loaded up the Babylon 5 station and some Star Furies very rapidly. And,
nice.
Just because I'm like, they have all that stuff in here, and
of course
their server was probably about 5 gigabytes or something at the time. I got more on my phone now than probably their entire server was at the time.
Yeah, was it kind of a very Raiders Lost Ark moment, sort of like just standing there, sort of hands hovering over the top of the model, going,
yeah, kinda. I mean, because it's weird because one of the sad and annoying things of modern CGI visual effects, whether it's on television or on film, especially on film, is for want of a better word, digital rot. Yeah. And what that means is basically just stuff gone, going, disappearing, being deleted, being backed up off of a server onto a tape that will never get read again. The thing is back, for want of a better word, in the practical days, when you had more makeup, you had more costumes, you had more miniatures, you had sets and whatever, you had a physical thing that would, not always, but sometimes would get stored, and would be kept. And we now have in museums and on expensive auctions online. Yeah. But the thing is when you produce, a digital version of a ship, for example, the Babylon 5 station. The Babylon 5 station never existed in reality. But the thing is, luckily for example, the Babylon 5 station does still exist. It still lives on several computers around the world, including mine. I kept a backup of it.
Nice.
But the thing is, a lot of this stuff, especially from a lot of the newer modern productions, is gone. The show's over. It gets backed up. It gets put on a bunch of whatever's, hard drives or tapes or whatever, gets sent over to the studio, and it's deleted. It's removed from the servers on the visual effects house. And then the studio, they stick it in a vault somewhere, and it's gone.
Yeah.
And it possibly, and so this stuff, like even, I'm looking at the Babylon 5 station in 99. That was only a few years after the show had been on the air. But the reality is, if I went to a company, like if I went to work at, I don't know, Digital Domain or ILM or something, today, and I was like, oh, let me have a look at the whatever they worked on 5 years ago.
Yeah.
It's not there. First of all, I wouldn't, even if it was there, I wouldn't be able to get to it because I would be locked into a folder that would be the show that I was working on. I wouldn't be able to look at older stuff. But even if I owned the company or whatever, I still wouldn't be able to find it because it wouldn't be there. It would be gone. It would have been removed from their server, and it would be gone, and potentially it would be lost. And it's a shame. There's a lot of stuff that's sort of getting lost.
So from the sound of it, I mean, you obviously prefer practical models. I mean, is that something?
I'm kind of in the middle. Okay,
yeah.
I grew up on the world of practical models, and obviously I wanted to do that. I mean, as a kid, that was when I always tell everybody the thing that I was always interested in this sort of stuff, but it wasn't until around 1977, and I think if I remember rightly, it was after 1977 because I was living in England at the time, and we always got things. I don't think we got Star Wars until late 77 or early 78.
Yeah.
I don't even remember when it actually was released in the UK.
Boxing Day 77.
Boxing Day, there you go. Yeah, I remember it being quite a while afterwards because my dad had actually been to the States on a trip and had brought me back the model kits. I remember having, and he brought back the book, the paperback book.
Yeah.
Which of course I was age 9 at the time, and there was no way I was going to actually read that book. But in the middle of the book, there was a bunch of pictures. It had like those 8 or 16 pages of pictures in the middle of the paperback book, which I looked at, I don't know how many millions of times. But I had an R2D2 and a C3PO model kit from NBC. I remember bringing it back, and I remember it being a long time afterwards, before Star Wars actually saw the film. But I remember before the film coming out, there was a special that they put on TV that was called The Making of Star Wars.
Yeah.
And that was the first time when I knew that they built miniatures, and I knew that they blew them up, and I knew that they filmed them and all that, but I didn't know how. And that was the first time that I'd seen footage of a blue screen stage with a motion control camera and these miniatures. And that was very, very pivotal. Because that was suddenly where all these pieces that I had been trying to assemble for the last 3 or 4 years of my life. I mean, I was only 9 at the time, but by the time I was around 6, I remember seeing Thunderbirds for the first time. And that was when I was like, wow. And so there'd been a few years where as a young kid, I'm like I know there's bits of this, but never quite gelled together. And then The Making of Star Wars kind of gelled it together. And I wanted to do miniatures, and then of course CGI came along. But the thing is I want to use, if I was doing an effects, I want to use. Take Christopher Nolan. He's a really good example. If I were, because he uses what is best for the shot and his people, his effects, staff, effects supervisor. They use what is best for the shot. So when you see, a Batman, or you see Interstellar, or you see Inception or whatever, there's an awful lot of CGI. There's an awful lot of sets. There's an awful lot of miniatures. There's a lot of practical, and they mix them all together, and they do a really good job of mixing them all together because they can, and it gives you some really amazing imagery where you can't go, oh yeah, that was CGI. Oh yeah, that was a miniature. Oh yeah, that was live action. You can't tell, and that's the best part. Because nowadays, you watch, I don't know, Avengers or something, and you know that 90% of what you're looking at is all CGI. But when you're looking at something like, Interstellar, you don't. And that for me is the best. So I like miniatures, I like practical, I like makeup, I like CGI.
But you're not exclusive.
No, I like the flexibility of CGI, but I like the tactileness of the real world. And so,
have you ever done practical effects professionally, Lee?
A little bit, not as much as I would like to, but I have. Yeah, I've done some. Basically, earlier, as it were, doing miniatures. So, and that's where why essentially my hobby now is actually is going back and building miniatures again, because it's good to sort of get away from the computer and do something with your fingers. Actually, touch something and paint something and sand something or whatever. So
somewhere out there is Jim Moon shouting euphemism at the top of his voice.
Yeah. So
yes.
When it comes to sort of like your practical models, I mean, obviously you enjoy the tactileness, the fact it's physically there. I mean,
yes. It's really there, and
yeah. I mean, is there any ships that you were working on in CG, for example, that you think to yourself now, looking back in hindsight, that would have been so much easier, and the result would have been so much better if I'd done it as a practical model?
Ooh, that's a tough one, because the thing is, it's a tough one because. Most of what I've worked on has been I've worked on films, but most of what I've worked on is TV. Most of my experience is TV. Yeah. And the thing with TV is, and the thing I like about working in TV is that you've always got a tenth of the budget and half the time, if you're lucky.
Yeah.
But the guys who are either producing the show, writing the show, or whatever, have always gone out and seen the newest movie that is out that cost $200 million to make. And have gone, I've got this brilliant idea for an episode. We're going to, they just went and saw the last Terminator film or the last whatever, and have just stolen some idea from that they saw in that film that probably cost more for that one shot than the entire episode, that we're currently working on. And so there's always this challenge of having to produce far more than what your budget is giving you. But I like that aspect. So the thing is practical stuff in now, modern, when you compare it to CGI stuff, it does cost more.
Yeah.
It really does. And the thing is, it's not actually the cost of building the spaceship, because if you were to build a miniature of the Galactica, from the new Battlestar, I say new, it's old now. Don't tell me how it's 13 years ago.
The newer Galactica.
Yeah.
It's like, it's crazy. It seems like yesterday. But if you were to build, like the original 1978, the original Galactica TV show, they built a miniature of the Galactica, and it was 6 foot long. If you were to say, I want, to build a replica of that Galactica, not the new one, the original one, and I'm going to hire a model shop to build it. To be perfectly honest, I mean, if you got it for less than, I don't know, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, it would be a bargain, Now, to build the CGI version of the Galactica on the new show, I'll be honest, I'm forgetting now how much the budget was. But if I recall rightly, it was about 14 or 15,000 was the budget. So the thing is that's like half what it would cost to build, and that was to build a CG version. But to have built that Galactica as a actual miniature would have probably been more, because it's actually a more complicated shape. It's more curved than the original Galactica was, and it's got a different level of detailing on it. So let's say it would have cost $50,000, so it would have cost more. But then it's not. The thing is okay, now you've built the miniature, which would look great and would look better than the CGI model. You've now got to rent a stage. You've now got to rent a motion control gear. You've now got to rent a crew. You've now got to rent the cameras. In order to film it. And for every shot that you want to do, you've got to then film it. Then you'll still have to bring it into the computer and add the Vipers and the explosions and the stars and the background and the whatever, the engines and stuff. So the thing is it all comes down to cost. It's time and money and cost and what is cheaper. So, the thing is, yes, practical stuff will look better. But it won't necessarily cost less. So, but back to what your question was of what would I like to have built. It's a tough one, because I'd love to have built the Galactica.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it wouldn't have been practical for doing the show. It just wouldn't have been possible to have done the number of shots and the budget that we had by doing it as a practical miniature. So that wouldn't really happen. Firefly, same story. Star Trek. Now, Star Trek's it's a good example. I was on Voyager. Voyager started, with all pretty much practical miniature shots. Although they did do some CGI in the pilot. Yeah. Especially that opening sequence. That was
so they actually built a physical Voyager model, because I thought the model was CGI.
I believe it's actually living in England. It was in the Christie's auction, and it's a very nice miniature. It's about 4 foot long, if I recall, 4 or 5 foot long. Yeah, no. I mean, the first 4 or 5 seasons, 4 seasons especially, was almost exclusively with miniatures, and all the stock shots and the reuse shots that you see were of the miniature. Yep. Yeah. And then they built a digital version. Now, they built a digital version actually for the pilot of Voyager, because some of the shots in that opening sequence that for every episode were digital, especially that shot when it's going through like what looks like Saturn's rings.
Yeah.
And you sort of see that reflection on the ring, on the ice. You see a reflection. That was a CG shot. And there's another one where it's kind of going through a cloud, like a greenish, bluish kind of nebula cloud.
Yeah.
That was like, and I remember actually seeing that on an Alias Power Animator, which later became Maya, demo reel back in the mid '90s, and they made a big deal about the fact that they did that shot because that was like a really early fluid simulation, which in the mid '90s was just unheard of. But they did a fluid sim around the front of the ship for that particular shot.
Yeah.
So of course it was very expensive shot to do. But anyway, so Voyager started with practical and then moved into CG. And so that's a good example of showing, well, why did they move into CG? Well, 2 reasons really. One was that they could, because the Trek guys were more particular about the look, and they wanted to make sure, and they wouldn't move to CG until they could believe that the CG shots could match the miniature shots. But once they got to that point, that's why Next Gen and most of DS9 was still miniatures. It was only the end of DS9 where they started to use some CG, and then about midway through Voyager they started to use CG. The thing was that then gave them the flexibility to do. The thing is when you build something, when you do a shot with the motion control camera and the miniature, you kind of go, you're like, okay, the shot's going to do this, and okay, so we do that, and they film it, and then they look at it and they go, it's not quite right. We want to adjust it. Okay, well, that'll be another $20,000 for us to go back to the stage and refilm it.
Yeah.
Okay, the first shot looks great. We'll go with that. But when it's in CG, they can look at a low res, simplified version of the shot. We can do 5 different versions of it. They can then pick the one they want, and then they can change it again another 5 times, and then they can render it out, and then they can change it again 3 more times, and and keep sort of tweaking it, and adjusting it, and noodling it, because that was something that they couldn't really do so much with the practical stuff, and I think that gave them the flexibility that they liked and wanted.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, so Voyager is a good example of how things changed, especially for TV. For TV, and that's where CG has its advantage, is the flexibility and the ability to sort of do things over and make changes. Sometimes too much, and it does actually drive us and people working in the industry up the wall. The fact that they you don't have to be locked into a particular decision, because you just press a couple of buttons and it changes it, and you can just press another button and it re-renders it all again, and it's done and it's great. It's not that easy, but think about if you had a ship and you needed to blow up this spaceship flies in, it blows up, boom, where you build a miniature, you spend 6 weeks with the crew building a miniature. You build the miniature, you rig it with Primacore, and you blow it up, and you get what you get. And that's what you get. And if it ain't right, well, you want to spend another X amount of dollars building another one and blowing it up again.
You could have never gotten the kind of evolution of the damage to the Galactica, I suppose, with a practical model.
Right, and that's why if you look at shows like Next Gen and DS9 and Voyager and stuff, the ship never changed. They may have an episode where something happened to it and it got damaged or it got hit or whatever, and the next episode it's back as it was.
Yeah.
Back to the stock shots, basically. All right, so you talked a little bit about the Galactica there. So were you in charge of actually just tell us a little bit about designing the new Galactica, because it's a bit of a departure from the original, but it still is reminiscent of the original.
Oh, all right. How many hours do you want?
Just the Cliff Notes version.
Welcome to part one.
Yes. Luckily and thankfully, I was quite heavily involved with the design and the build and the look of the new Galactica. And I'm not saying that I selfishly took that upon myself because I was the supervisor on that show, or one of the two supervisors on that show. But it was because, I could, and so I was just like, yes.
Because you'd previously done The Second Coming, hadn't you, which was a CG version of the original Galactica?
Yeah, okay. Well, all right. You want the Cliff Notes, but as I say, I actually do a 2-hour talk at some conventions where I do the whole thing about the evolution and the building and the design and how all this came about for the Galactica. I
was going to say, if you want, we can.
Yeah, the short. Okay, so the short version is, all right. Before I actually moved to LA, I'd already knew Richard Hatch, who was the original Apollo on Battlestar Galactica, and he was trying to get a new Galactica off the ground. And I was kind of this is before I moved to LA, but I was a budding CGI wannabe, and so he had put out a thing saying, "Hey, anybody want to help me with this thing? I'm doing this little promo thing to try and get another Galactica." So I was like, "Yeah, I do. I want to help." And so I did, and did some shots on that one. And it was right. Actually, and the thing was, it was right around when they were doing that I actually got hired to move out to LA. And I moved out to LA, and then we actually ended up finishing it while I was already in LA. And it was a huge hit. It was he took it to some conventions and showed it around, and took it to Universal and the thing was, Universal at this point had basically forgotten about Galactica. They didn't know; they'd completely forgotten it existed. And Richard really kind of brought it back to their attention. And I fully credit Richard for being the one who got the new show on the air, because he wasn't directly responsible for what came on the air, but the thing was, he essentially lit the fire under Universal and kind of went, "Hey, you had this show that was actually, it didn't last very long back in the 70s, but it was very popular and has a surprisingly, it's well known still. People have fond memories of it and stuff like that. So I don't think, to be honest, that Universal took him seriously in his plans to do a continuation series. But it kind of kicked them in, and I firmly give him the credit for actually getting this all to happen. So Universal suddenly was like, wow, yeah, we have this show. And then what they did was they actually promptly licensed it to Fox, because a guy called Bryan Singer and Tom DeSanto, who are director and producer of a movie called X-Men that came out, what was that, 99, 2000?
Yeah.
And kind of, kick-started this whole new resurgence in superhero films. And after they had done that and had a very big success with them, the thing with Hollywood is if you have a success, everybody is basically lining up to sort of go, hey, what do you want to do next? And Tom DeSanto is an absolutely massive Galactica fan, original Galactica fan. And he basically, Fox, he said to Fox, hey, I want to do a reboot, continuation of Battlestar Galactica, and they were just like, well, that thing in the 70s, okay. And they gave him a large amount of money to actually develop and start to create a new Galactica. And I'd heard about this because now I was working in LA, and we'd heard about this through the grapevine, and I latched onto that really good. And we did a little demo when I was at Foundation, as like a little side project. And we sent it down to Tom, and he was really impressed, and they spoke to us. And so we were basically lined up while I was working at Foundation in Imaging to do the effects for Tom DeSanto and Bryan Singer's Battlestar Galactica. right around this was sort of mid-late 2000, mid 2001, and they were building sets up in Canada. They were building Vipers. They were designing new Cylons down in LA, and it was going swingingly. And we were getting excited about the possibility of doing the VFX for this new show. And then a little thing called 9/11 happened, and basically put the stop on anything, anything that involved explosions, killing of people, surprise attacks on civilizations that tries to wipe out the humans. That one kind of got killed like overnight, basically. There's many much been written about that, but basically anyway, it got killed at the end of or 2/3 of the way through 2001, and so that kind of went away. Then once things calmed down and settled down, and a year later, basically that's when Ron Moore came on board, and he went back to Universal because the Tom DeSanto project was actually at 20th Century Fox. They'd effectively licensed it from Universal, which is kind of weird, but sort of how things work out there. Anyway, the Ron Moore one came along, and he went back to them and said, "Hey, how about we do just a reimagination? We're not gonna use, we're gonna take elements of that 70s show, and we're gonna basically not that 70s show, but the show from the 70s, and we're going to do a new Galactica." So I was now working at another company, and but I'd been following. It was one of those things. I was just like keeping an eye on where this was possibly going, and it turned out that one of the guys that had been talking with Tom DeSanto was Lonnie Pierstead, who I ended up basically be working for him at Zoic Studios. After Foundation Imaging had closed. And so he had actually been involved with the Galactica, with Tom DeSanto, Brian Singer project. And so basically I was now working with him, and that was who we did Firefly with. And so after Firefly had closed down was right around the time when Ron Moore was coming up with this new show. And it kind of aligned. We basically, it was just like, hey, the Galactica, let's go after this. And it was like, yeah. So we basically went, Ronnie approached Universal. They had already seen Firefly, really liked it. And so the combination of the work we'd done on Firefly are already kind of pursuing and following this Galactica story that had gone through several years and several different people at this point. It kind of all melded together, and we ended up then doing the effects for the pilot of the new show, which is... See, it's not the Cliff Notes version. I told you, this is like a 2-hour talk that I do.
We'll call this the Galactica special version. It's fine.
Yeah, that is even the short version, because there's a whole lot of other stuff that goes into it. So then we've got to build the Galactica. All right.
Yes, building spaceships. Hey.
Building spaceships. That's what we're talking about. Yeah. So okay. Up in Canada, they were then working on the new show. Building sets, designing stuff and everything else. And one of the people that was involved with designs for the new show, there was Richard Livingston and Eric Chu. And Eric Chu was kind of tasked with, well, actually they both were, but coming up with a new design for the Galactica. Now, one of the dictations, as it were, from the Sci-Fi Channel, which was actually called the Sci-Fi Channel at that time, not the Syphilis Channel.
Siffy.
Yeah, the Siffy Channel. I'm glad I don't work there anymore. I just couldn't do it. I was really happy. So at the Sci-Fi Channel, well, one of their stipulations was that they weren't allowed to use anything that was used on the original show. They wanted everything to look different, everything to be new, everything to be, they didn't want any, and so, you've got David Icke, who was the producer, you got Ron Moore, who was the exec producer and writer, and they were just like, they were basically kind of like, yeah, no, ignore what they're saying, we're going to do this. So they were basically saying yes to the Sci-Fi Channel and no to everybody else. So the thing was, they knew that they wanted to pick and choose certain elements of the original show to keep, and other stuff they were going to redesign. So, you'll notice things like the Cylon, Raider and Base Star and things like that are completely different, and that was for a reason. That they wanted those. That kind of helped the keep the Sci-Fi Channel happy. But things like the Viper, they were like, no, it's going to look very similar to the Viper because they like the original Viper. I mean, how can you not?
Yeah.
So that's why the new Viper, the Mark II, as they called it, looks very, very similar to the one from the original show. Now, the Galactica is another story. So, again, there's a long story to this. But basically, Eric ended up coming up with this design that got approved by the Sci-Fi Channel that looks, and it's very hard to kind of do online, audio-wise. But anyway, if I showed you the image, it looks nothing like what the Galactica looks like, but it looks everything like the Galactica looks like. He basically kind of come up with this more submarine-looking design with these ribbed panels down the side of it. It was a vase or a glass that he'd found, and he basically used that as the basis for the design, or at least the initial look. And that was sent off to Sci-Fi Channel and was approved. And then that was what I was given. Now, the art department as well up in Vancouver had been given that, but had also been given more instructions from David and Ron to make sure that there was still a recognizable shape of the Galactica to the original show. So what I received was basically this sketch, this one side view sketch of the Galactica from Eric that was approved by the Sci-Fi Channel. And then 3 or 4 pictures from the art department of, actually up in Vancouver, who were doing the schematics that you see on the displays, the panels on the walls on the bridge set.
Yeah,
it's kind of like a top view and a side. I think there's a top view and there is a kind of a side view. And so, but really it was the top view, which showed the pods extended and the pods retracted. And that was what I was given to sort of work with. And again, this is kind of difficult to explain without actually visually showing it. But book me for your sci-fi convention and I'll come and show you it.
Yeah.
So there was these several sketches. And so I basically was given the task, or I say given the task, I took the task myself to take on turning those 2 or 3 sketches from the art department, which were these kind of not wireframe, kind of outline sketches, the basic shape, and then this one image that Eric had done, and turning that into a 3D model. And there was both the complication of turning that into a 3D shape that looked pleasant, and also looked like the shape that you now see, but also adhered to the side view that the Sci-Fi Channel had approved, and the top view that the art department had done up on the set, the set dressing people, and also something that looked good in 3D because, if you know anybody who's sort of worked with blueprints or worked with, concept art and stuff like this, what looks good on a piece of paper doesn't always translate into the real world, into 3D. It's surprising. It's a pain. So there was a lot of back and forward and jiggling around, but that was really, that was a fun part of trying to take this. And as I say, the thing is the side view still had to match the basic shape that the Sci-Fi Channel had approved because I had to send renders back off to the Sci-Fi Channel and have them approve it. The one thing we didn't do was to show them the top view of it, or the 3/4 angle view of it, until it was too late, because that looked remarkably, if you look at the Galactica, it looks remarkably different from the side than it does from all the other angles that you see it from.
Yeah.
Because from the side, dead on from the side, it doesn't look very good. But that's the view that the Sci-Fi Channel had approved. And so, so then it was getting down to then obviously detailing it, because what I basically had at that point was a very basic shape that had these strange ribs, and those caused much confusion and amusement for quite some time.
Ribs for her pleasure?
Exactly. Yeah, I've never heard that one before.
I know. You've got to get the classics out of the way.
So there was much confusion. I actually came up with a completely made up but almost plausible excuse and reason for the ribs.
Yep.
What it is okay, and it's completely made up by me, but
so this is headcanon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Okay, so the reasoning for the ribs is that if you all of the gubbins, all of the the weaponry, all of the important stuff is essentially protected by the ribs. It's sort of recessed slightly into the ribs. It's kind of like it's kind of like the whatever the hell they're called on a boat. You know, when you had a wooden battleship, the ribs effectively that they built in the ship that then they covered with wood on the outside. It's a similar sort of idea to that. And so all the cannons and stuff are recessed in behind them. And so if like the Galactica is heading towards something, all of that is protected because you've got these ribs, and the ribs act as like a bulkhead essentially, like on a ship. And so the thing is if anybody's attacking the Battlestar, they can't do any real damage to anything because these ribs are essentially, protecting all of the important stuff and all the weaponry. Now the Galactica has what we call the big guns. There's big guns and little guns. There's the big guns on the top and on the bottom, and those one of the things I came up with those was that they actually retract and lift up. And that was one of the things, and this was the stuff where I got to have a lot of fun and an input because, first of all, the guns were not in any of the designs and where they were. And so I got to, it was like, figure out, okay, well, where should they go and what would they do? And the idea was that they could be retracted for protection and then they could, pop up, as it were, and fire as need be. But the thing with the ribs is, okay, the Galactica is heading towards you. And these guns, these big guns, can sort of pop up from the top and the bottom and still fire forwards over the ribs, but be fairly protected by the ribs themselves. So if the other ship is firing at you, they've got a fairly difficult time doing any damage. So what they have to do is they have to then come around either the top or the bottom or the sides of you, because we're in three-dimensional space. So now, as soon as they do that, as soon as the other ship kind of comes around the side or over the top of the Galactica, now it's essentially everything on the Galactica, all of the smaller weaponry, all of the launch tubes, and still the big guns that it have, are now pointed directly at whatever other ship is there. It's basically like, as I say, like a Master and Commander, type of battleship, the old wooden galleons. When they came head on towards each other, they couldn't really do anything.
Yeah.
They couldn't shoot at each other. I mean, some of them would have like cannons in the front, but it wouldn't really do much. And it wasn't until they came broadside on each other that they could then open, because all the cannons are then pointing directly at, and they can open fire on it. And that's exactly the idea behind the Galactica, is that all of the real weaponry and the little anti-aircraft, the smaller weapons that are on the Galactica, there's over 500 of those spread over it, plus the dozen or so big guns that are on it. And the thing is so basically when something comes around broadside, when it can actually attack it, when it can attack anything that's vulnerable, which is recessed behind these ribs, now it's basically facing all of the guns, like on an old galleon,
Nice.
So that was my completely made up rationale for the ribbing.
Well,
which,
it works.
Almost, yeah. It kind of actually makes it work, and have some sort of logic, But that was one of the fun parts about working on the Galactica was figuring out why it does certain things and what needs to be there and why it needs to be there and where it goes and everything else. So, for example, things like where is the the bridge or the command center, because on the original it was sort of like on Star Trek where it was up on the nose, up on the front, the worst possible place to put the bridge. So
please hit here.
Yeah, exactly. Shoot here, game over, done. Or they even shoot here. Just your friggin' robots. Your robots flying spaceships. Okay, 20 of you fly right there.
Yeah.
And if 6 of you get through, well done. Game's over. The ship's done. So the command center on the Galactica is actually right in the middle. Pretty much not exactly in the middle, but pretty much in the middle of the ship. It's in the most protected area that could possibly be.
Yeah.
And so, again, one of the things that I got to sort of do was that if you notice, there's not an awful lot of windows on the Galactica.
No.
There's very, very few, because if you're a spaceship, and that's a vulnerability, and you're a battleship, it's a huge vulnerability. So it was kind of like, well, why do we need windows? Well, one of the reasons why we have windows, especially on, which is very useful on things like Star Trek ships, is that it gives you a scale.
Yeah.
When you look at windows, it's actually, for me, when you look at something, it's like one of the first things you do. You look at a skyscraper or whatever, where you don't know how tall it is, but you can go, okay, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. It's 50 stories tall. That's pretty big, because you can see the windows, and it's weird. So you look at a Star Trek ship, and you can immediately get an idea how big it is, except for the JJ prize, of how big it is based on the windows on the outside.
Yeah.
So, it was like, okay, I want windows, because one of the things we want to do is to make sure that we give scale for the Galactica, but we don't want windows because they're not practical. So what I ended up doing was just putting windows under that kind of chin area. There's basically really only one area on the Galactica that has windows, and that's under the head in what we call the chin area, where, the idea being, it's like, okay, that's sort of where the living quarters might be. And if you're in a battle situation, nobody should be there, and that's a vulnerable area. And anything important is going to move back.
Yeah.
Same goes. I mean, so basically, it was like all these little things got to basically have some ideas behind them. And the other thing that we got to do with essentially designing the Galactica was we ended up actually using a lot of practical elements from the original series. Now, this is, again, hard to explain without a visual, but when we did the test a few years before for Tom DeSanto, what I did was I got a friend of mine, Jim Greveling in Florida, had actually built a 6-foot replica of the Galactica. He was the first one to build one. And I basically was like, look, I want to build a CGI version of the Galactica, of the original Galactica, for this test for Tom DeSanto. And I was thinking, well, how are we going to make it look really good? I want to make it look real. I want to make it look like we have a miniature, because the Tom DeSanto show, they'd actually thought about bringing the original miniatures out of essentially retirement and filming them again. And we were like, look, for a TV show, it's more practical to do it CGI, but we wanted to show that we could make a CGI image look as good as a practical one.
Right.
So I was like, well, what we'll do is we'll build a piece. We're going to build a piece of the Galactica for this test, and replicate the look of the miniature. Well, the best way to do that is to essentially get the model kit parts that were used to detail the original Galactica, and build CGI versions of those. So what I did was I contacted Jim and a couple other people that I know, and I bought a couple, and basically what we did is we built essentially like a little toolkit of all the little model kit parts that we used to detail the small area of the Galactica around where the name is, on the pod, on one of the pods. All of those little bits, we basically built CGI versions of all those bits, and then put them, and essentially then glued them, onto a digital kind of shell, and basically made a replica of a small section of the Galactica that we then used for this test. But what that meant was that I had now had this library of about 100 pieces of essentially digital model kit parts that had been used on the original Galactica. And so what we did was we used those and some more that I had from another source to use for detailing all the ships on the new Galactica. So the new Galactica, when you see a lot of the little detail-y parts in there, the greebles and the nurnies, as we call them, especially in the engine section or underneath or anywhere where you see all these sort of small details, they're actually about 90% of them are actually digital model kit parts that are the same digital model kit parts that were used on the original 1978 Galactica.
Ah.
Okay, so and that was actually part of what I was trying to do I wanted to kind of bring some of this sort of raw, kind of tactile, kind of not perfectness from building a miniature to the CG stuff that we were doing for TV. And so, the thing is when you build a CG model, it's really easy to make it smooth and make it clean and make everything fit perfectly. And that's one of the things that a miniature doesn't quite have. When you look at a miniature, I mean, if you've ever seen like the Falcon or a Star Destroyer or the original Galactica or anything like that, there's holes, there's gaps, there's bits that don't fit quite perfectly together. It's not perfect, but that kind of gives it that believability that it's real. Yeah. Because when you look at a tractor or a big earth moving machine or well, I was going to say a car engine, but a car engine before 15 years ago, when it actually looked like an engine,
as opposed to a lump of plastic.
Yeah, exactly. Last new car I bought, I lifted up the hood or the bonnet, as you should say, kind of went, well, there's an engine under there somewhere, and promptly closed it again, because there was nothing, But anyway, so the thing is, if you look at the real world things, which this stuff is based on, it has, it has pipes and it has holes and it has gaps and it has things that, and so we wanted to create that. So a lot of the detailing that's on the new Galactica used digital versions of model kit parts to try and kind of give it a little bit more of a realistic feel to it. And again, this was something that I got to bring to it and have a good time. And then there's many other layers. There's layers and layers that went onto it, and more than you would think actually. So, but it because I sort of had an interest in wanting to make the new Galactica, interesting and fun and it's sci-fi, but at least bring some elements of believability to it. And because I had a passion and interest in that sort of stuff, it sort of fueled itself. It fueled to kind of add more and to do more and to think about things a little bit more than maybe you would on another project or whatever. So.
I mean, with the Galactica, we'll move on to some of your other ships and some other questions in a minute. But with the Galactica, obviously it's quite an iconic ship to start with. And did at any point did you sit there and look at this thing and think, "Oh Christ, what have I got myself into?"
Oh
sort of the peer pressure and the fan expectations.
Oh yeah. No. Trust me. Right. That was part of the reason why I did a lot of the like extra thought and extra detailing and stuff like that, because I knew that there would, to be perfectly honest, one of the things I never thought that would happen was that there would be a model kit of it. Because when I was building it, I was just like, there's no way they're ever going to build a model kit of this because it's too bloody complicated. There's too many little doodads and little stuff and all these little all these little greebles we were putting on it and stuff. So I was really surprised that they actually came out with a model kit part of it. But no, part of the fun part of the pressure of building in all those details and stuff was the fact that I myself, if I wasn't the one doing this, would have been the one that would have been scrutinizing it and making sure that it was right. Yeah. So I was doing that for myself at the same sort of time. And one of the things that I spent an awful lot of time on and was very particular about making sure would work was one of the things that bugged me about the original Galactica was the relationship between where they landed in the back, where the sets went, and where the launch tubes came out the sides. Because on the original Galactica, it just doesn't work. It's like, you can kind of fart around with it and move things around and pretend and it might work. But the reality is it doesn't line up and it doesn't fit and it doesn't whatever. And it doesn't matter. Most sets, when you see, the set that goes inside a vehicle or inside a building or whatever, and you see the outside, the two don't match up as much as you might think. That's a normal movie making filmmaking trick. best example is the APC from Aliens, but that's a whole other story, you know. So the inside and the outside don't match. But one of the things I really like to try to do is that connection between the inside and the outside. I feel is really important, and I feel that when you see a set, you know, that's built, you know, and with the actors on or whatever, and then when you kind of either move or you cut or you know, that there's a connection between that and the visual effects that we put in. And, you know, like an inside-outside, you know.
Yeah.
And one of the things that always bugged me, you know, like on say, Star Trek, was that you'd see a shuttlecraft or whatever it was, and it would always have these just black windows. You know, you couldn't see inside because, obviously, practically, with a miniature and with people, getting them to be photographed separately and then comping them inside the miniature, it's just impossible with the budget. It's just not possible. With CGI, it is possible. So one of the things I really like to try and do is this sort of connection between the inside and the outside, and connecting the visual effects with the live action that's been shot. And we did that, you know, quite well on Firefly. In fact, actually, one of the things I did was to build like interiors for the Serenity and stuff like that based on the sets, which we then put inside the CGI model so that there could be a sort of a connection. So on the Galactica, one of the things that I really wanted to make work was having the landing bay, the elevators, the set that was in Vancouver of the you know, launch bay, the hangar bay, you know, the launch tubes, you know, have it all work and have it actually fit inside the Galactica, so that it, you know, as the geek me version from 15 years earlier could be happy that it would work, you know, and it does. So what, you know, when you see, you know, the inside of those pods, there are elevators and there are rooms and there are walkways, and they all work and they all fit. And if a Viper lands on one of those elevators and goes down, and then comes into the sets, it does physically, you know, take up the right amount of room, and it does actually work. And then there is a room for that piece to, you know, that Viper to then move into a launch tube and to then go back out, and it does line up with the outside of the ship. It all does actually work. And I did an image. I did like a cutaway of the Galactica a couple of years ago, just to be able to show people, because people had asked me about it, and I was like, yeah, it does actually work. And I did spend a lot of time. And in fact, the outside of the Galactica was adjusted so that it could work because they'd already built the sets up in Vancouver, and they were already filming the actual live action up in Vancouver when we were building the CG models. So the thing was, I was like, okay, well, let me take the set that they built in Vancouver and build a quick version of that, and then put it inside, you know, the Galactica as it's being built. And I'm like, oh, it fits. Oh, okay. So we, you know, clone that one and put another elevator here, and clone that and put another elevator. And so basically I figured out, okay, how many hangars there are inside each pod, how many launch tubes that meant, where the launch tubes went, and how that influenced the outside design of the pods. Anyway, so the short version, not very short, is that yes, it does all work, and I did that because if I wasn't the one doing it, I would be the one that was looking at it and critiquing it and making sure it does work.
I do have one question for you.
Okay, just one.
One for the purposes of brevity, if we say. How do you get from the starboard flight pod to the port flight pod?
Sorry. Oh, okay, that's easy. Very, very easy. It's designed.
Go down the hall to the left.
It's designed. It's built, but it was never shown on the show.
Okay.
Okay. If you look on the inside of the pods, there are doors. There are some very large doors. And when the pods are retracted, they line up with other large doors on the center of the Galactica. And so you can transfer stuff back and forward from left and right pods, which are actually not that far apart from each other. When the pods are retracted, they cannot be done when they're not retracted. But when they're retracted, so basically where there are 6 elevators that go from the landing bay down to the hangars. There are 6 elevators. Those elevators on sort of the insides, on the back wall of those elevators, there are big doors, huge doors. And when the pods are connected, they can open. And then the idea is that in the middle of the Galactica, between the 2 pods, are the workshops. Now, on the show, they kind of showed that the hangar bays were the workshops, but the idea was that when the Galactica was fully operational, when it was, as it were, earlier, younger, when those hangar bays were just used for, refueling and launching, basically, and maybe, check the oil and clean the windshield. But if there was any sort of actual maintenance, needed to be done, or repairs, major repairs, they would be transferred into the central belly of the Galactica, where there would be essentially a huge workshop area in between the 2 pods. So it was never shown because it was just too big to ever be shown. So when now I don't want to get into Blood and Chrome because that opens up a whole can of worms. But in Blood and Chrome, they expanded those hangar decks to be bigger, and they actually won't fit into the pods.
Neither would the Vipers, would they?
No, but that's exactly. The Vipers won't fit into launch tubes, but that's a whole other thing. But what they were trying to do there was to sort of show that the sets were bigger, the room in there was bigger than was what was shown on the show. And I like to sort of think that what they were trying to show I didn't work on Blood and Chrome, but of course I know all the people that did. But what they were essentially showing there with these bigger, wanting to show a bigger space, that for me is what's actually in the middle between the 2 pods, is this much bigger space where you could have racks of Vipers stacked up, ready to go, either in storage or for repair and things like that. So
yeah.
So anyway,
thank you. That's been bugging me since the minisode, the miniseries. So,
so when the pods are retracted, there are six large doors on each pod, which line up with 6 large doors on the center, and they can transfer back and forward quite easily. And there's a large area in the middle.
Okay, well, this kind of is interesting because it brings me to another thing I was thinking. If you've sat there and you've spent X amount of months, weeks, years building this stuff and really putting some thought into it, and
Yep.
I guess you might get this more with the Trek ships.
Yep.
You've obviously got your head canon or studio Bible that's saying this is how it is. How do you react? When you see like this stuff online where people are sort of proclaiming that the ship is an X amount of length, and there's so many other things in there which you never either factored into or is just plain wrong. How do you manage to distance yourself from your creation, or do you just constantly have like an ownership of it to the point?
It kind of it depends on the project. So, for example, if it's more in the Trek universe. I sort of stay further away from it because I was further away from that side of it. Because there was an art department with people like Rick Sternbach and that who were designing a lot of the the vehicles and the ships and the sets and things like that, and they would then forward all the information to us. And surprisingly, the thing is they had people working on the show, like Rick, who did what I was doing on Galactica, where they were thinking about this stuff. I mean, they had the same limitations, a limited time, a limited budget, and everything else. But those guys, were still thinking about this sort of stuff. So if somebody kind of comes up with something that's like a Star Trek-y thing, unless I had something directly to do with it, I tend to stay away from it further because I know that those guys would either jump in or could jump in or might say something. But if it's something that I was directly involved with, then I'm more, and if I see it, I'm more than happy to jump in and kind of go, no, it's actually this big. And as I say, and partly because I was the annoying fan, many years ago. I still am, I still am when it comes down to it.
If anyone does meet Lee at a comic convention, please go up and ask him about Blood and Chrome, because I've listened to that rant and it is hilarious.
Yes, but yeah. No. That's another yes. No, I mean, if it's something that I was directly involved with, I will be more than happy to either defend it or explain it or make something up on the spot that sounds like I know what I was talking about, and that we had designed it that way 15 years earlier, but we didn't really. But I can fudge it at the time. Yeah. But I did actually put out like a poster thing many years ago that we that's out there publicly. Now it wasn't. It was actually originally done for the writers on the show, and it's basically like a little poster that has. It was actually done right after the miniseries, and it was done for the season 1, and it has basically all the ships that we built for the miniseries, and it says how many crew it has and how big it is.
Yeah.
And then maybe a couple of other little doodads. Mostly it was like how big it is and how many people fit inside it. And I did that specifically for the writers so that they knew what models, what vehicles we had to play with going into the series, so that hopefully, they didn't, go, the XYZ ship appears and da-da-da-da. And then we go, oh, shit, now we've got to build a new ship. And we've got to, because, you don't, when you're doing a series, you kind of, part of the reason why you do a mini series, if you can afford to, before doing a series or do a pilot, is that has the money to pay for building all the stuff that you then use on the series.
Yeah.
Most people don't realize that a pilot for a TV show, especially like a sci-fi show, has 5 to 10 times the budget that the actual show has. And that's because they have to build sets, they got to make the costumes, they got to design the look, they got to, there's all this sort of stuff. And the idea is that they can then use all that when they go to series. So I did this sort of cheat sheet for the writers to kind of go, here's all the stuff we have already, please reuse some of it as much as possible, because it will save us an awful lot of headaches if you go, oh yeah, we're going to reuse this.
So did you ever have like the writers coming up to you and saying, this just won't do, we need to be able to do X, Y, or Z, please change it? Exactly.
Yeah, no, of course. And I mean, that's their job. And it's up to us to either come up with something or come back with an alternative or a solution or whatever. So yes, of course. I mean, they don't want to be restricted to what, we've got. But the idea to make these shows doable is that you kind of steer them in a direction, or kind of go, okay, you want this, we've got this, we can do this and make it that, and that will kind of get most of the way to what you want. Will that work? And they'll go, all right, yeah, okay, I can work with that.
Yeah.
So any production is like that, where it's a compromise one way or the other. And if they insist, then we say, all right, here's the check, here's the bill, and like most things that usually
results in them going away.
Yeah, or them coming up with another idea that's remarkably close to the one you had in the first place. So, so I did this cheat sheet kind of poster right after the miniseries, and that has the measurements of all the vehicles. And so if anybody says, oh, well, this is this big, I'll go, no, it's not. It's right there. It's this big. Because those measurements came directly from the CG models. And one of the things that I'm also a bit of a pain in the neck over is scale. and trying to make sure that stuff is built so that it will, build it to sort of like the real world scale, so that when you have a Viper flying next to or whatever, or you have whatever flying next to the Galactica or whatever, that it will work, and you don't have to cheat it all the time. We still cheat stuff all the time, but it's a lot better if you at least start with it being correct. I mean, good example is the Delta Flyer on Voyager.
Mm-hmm.
Won't fit through the door on the back, the shuttle bay door on the back of the Flyer. Doesn't work. The hangar that you see the Delta Flyer in isn't in the back of the Voyager because it won't fit.
Well, to be fair, Voyager had so many shuttlecraft.
Yes, yes, exactly. I think they're like rehydrated or something.
Just add water.
Yeah, exactly. They got one of those Back to the Future pizza rehydrators for shuttlecraft. Okay, here's another one. But and also, again, it's a normal thing for film and TV stuff where the insides don't always match the outsides. Again, the interior of the Delta Flyer doesn't fit inside the Delta Flyer. So, but for, as I say, for on Galactica, I tried to scale everything and adjust everything so that it did at least. You could load everything up. You could load all the different ships in the fleet. You could load up all the ships into the fleet, and they would all be the relative size to each other that they should be. Now, you often would then cheat something a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller, or whatever. But that was secondary. A good example of that was the Colonial. Sorry, not the Colonial. Colonial 1. It is Colonial.
Rosalind's ship.
Yeah, the Intersun liners. Rosalind's basically her ship. The Air Force One with the Air Force One paint job, which was actually something I got to add as well.
Nice.
That wasn't the Air Force One paint job was another one where we kind of had this would be a cool looking paint job because we didn't have any direction on the paint job for that at all, and so that was fun. But okay, so a good example, if you look at the concept art for that ship, it's actually about twice the size of what it is on the show. So we basically, Jose Perez built that ship for the show, and so I had him mock it up, and then when we realized that it had to go inside the landing bays of the Galactica and land, to dock, it wouldn't fit. It wasn't even close. It's like twice as big as what it was. So we had to, that was an example of where, now in a lot of shows, they would have just scaled it down and had it sail in, but not on mine. So what we did was I scaled it and basically I had Jose send me like the initial kind of low res version of that model. And what I did was I basically sized it, squeezed it a bit to get it so that it will just, if you look at it, it literally just fits in through the entrance to be able to land inside the Galactica. So what I did was I basically squeezed it, got it so that it would fit inside the Galactica and would be able to fly in. And then went in and went, okay, this is deck 1, this is deck 2, this is deck 3, And so instead of it having, I think in the concept art, it has 5 decks. In reality, it has 3. And so then what I did was I sent that back to Jose and was like, okay, windows here, here, and here. And so the ship design is exactly the same that Richard originally designed. It's just scaled differently. And so we used the windows. The windows is a good area to be able to show scale. So you'll see three rows of windows on the Colonial 1, whereas on the concept art, I think there's 5.
Right.
Okay.
So, Oh, sorry, I'm hearing myself. Well, I was going to ask you another frivolous question.
Yeah.
Obviously, you've worked on all these really iconic spaceships, all this fantastic stuff. Is there any spaceship that you ever thought, I wish I'd worked on that one?
Oh, all of them.
I mean, anyone specifically? Because I mean, I know I know Andy's going to hit you with a pretty hefty question, so I thought I'd get a frivolous one in.
Right. I mean, God, the list is too long. I mean, anything from Thunderbirds, anything that Derek Meddings or Mike Tripp was involved in on, Space 1999 or UFO, any of those, Jerry Anderson shows. I mean,
yeah.
I got to work on the new Captain Scarlet at the end, but yeah, I mean, any of those sort of things. I mean, the Eagle Transporter. I mean, Brian Johnson's design. I mean, that's just, it still looks good today. I mean, that's 40 years later. So yeah, of course. Anything from 2001, of course.
Yeah.
Again, can't. The list is too strong. I mean, it's too long. I mean, anything. All you got to do is look at my apartment and look at what's on the walls. Or if I, yeah.
Well, I'll say you have a rather large Narcissus model.
Yeah, that's me. Yes, I mean, obviously Alien and Aliens. Both of them truly iconic. But they hide the best. They hide some really good people. When you've got Ron Cobb or Chris Voss or Sid Mead and whatever working on your show, well, you better have some pretty damn good spaceships.
Yeah, you better get your value for money for that.
Yeah, trust me. Now, I mean, I haven't directly worked with Ron Cobb, who was one of the designers on many of those shows, but I did get to hire him, ironically, on Firefly. Ron Cobb actually designed 2 of the ships on Firefly. And that was because they sort of like, hey, we need somebody to design a couple of ships. Anybody you know who might be interested? And I was like, how about Ron Cobb? Oh, have you got his email? Yes. They contacted him and he gave them a bill and they went, oh, it's a bit expensive, but okay. So he actually did do 2 designs on, and it was all done remotely, unfortunately, because he lives in Australia now.
Yeah.
But one of these days, hopefully, I'll get to actually meet him in person. And,
cool.
That's cool.
So I kind of, that was as close as I got to work on, the Nostromo. Very distantly.
Yeah.
But then, like recently, there's a couple of really good things, like the ship from Oblivion.
Oh yeah.
And actually all the effects that Digital Domain did on that was just really good. Wasn't so keen on the ship at the end, that kind of pyramid thing, but really that's like going, well, we need a Death Star, but it can't be round. Okay, we'll make it square. It's okay, that's close enough. We need something like that. But yeah. But that I forget what they call it now. The pod the pod ship thingy.
Bubble ship.
The bubble ship, that's it. That's what it was called, yeah. Just so good. I mean, really, that's just top of the shelf. And then, even things like, apart from the Saturn V launch sequence, which I still don't get, the ship from Interstellar was really cool. The Endurance, yeah, that was really cool. And part of what made it really cool was that they built it practical. They built a very large miniature, 2 very large miniatures of that, and plus essentially a full-size set piece of the small shuttle. When you sort of see those shots, the light that's hitting the miniature, which is then going into the camera and being captured, that it's real.
Yeah.
It's like you see, I'm like, I remember watching the film and I'm like looking at this, I'm going, that's not, I mean, I'm a huge fan of CGI and there's some brilliant stuff that's CGI, but I'm like looking at those shots, I'm going, that's real. There really is a ship. I know it's a miniature because it's not for real size, but that sort of quality of the light, and that's what it's all about, really. It's the light that hits something that then bounces into the camera that then gets projected back into your eye. That's what it all comes down to, and that's why there's a lot of things where practical really does, sort of win over, especially for, characters and stuff. It's one of the things I did like about the new Star Wars Episode 7.
Yeah.
So that and the Harry Potter films, and the Lord of the Rings. That's one of the things for me that really separated the Lord of the Rings with the Hobbit, was that, they built a lot of sets and a lot of props and a lot of really, really good animatronics. If you haven't been to the Harry Potter exhibit at Leavesden in the UK, go, because you can see the love and the quality and the craftsmanship in the sets and in the miniature. The miniature of Hogwarts is just mind-blowing. It's the biggest miniature I've ever seen. I mean, they talk about bigatures for Lord of the Rings, and Hogwarts is a bigature. It must be 20 feet tall. It's amazing, but it shows on screen. It really does show on screen. So you watch Episode 7 and you see a lot of those creatures and stuff. Yeah, there's a lot of them that are augmented with CGI. Adding blinks or changing the face so that the mouth can be more animated or whatever. But you get that kind of believability because it really was there.
Yeah. So I mean, obviously, there's lots of you see it often. Usually in reviews where people sort of say, "Oh, this thing's got CGI in it, and it looks like a video game and all this kind of thing." I mean,
right?
Do you hold much truck with that kind of argument, or do you just think I tend to, which is like that's like a lazy get out of jail? We don't understand what we don't like, but we're just going to pin it on effects.
Yeah. Okay. And again, I'm on both sides of that argument because. Partly, I am on the side of the reviewers when they say, things like that, because I can see the same thing that they're seeing. Because again, a lot of times when even if you have a lot of money, it still doesn't. It's amazing how difficult it is to make something look real, and it doesn't matter if it was one of the Star Wars prequels where there was a lot of digital set extensions and stuff. They had plenty of money, or it's the new Warcraft movie, which is a phenomenal, but it's still there's or especially of like Avengers 2 or whatever, where or Iron Man 3 actually for me was the worst, but it's like they had plenty of money, but it still doesn't look. There's something missing. There's something not quite right there, and so I do understand what people are saying when they pick on this sort of stuff. But the flip side of that is. There's two flip sides of it. First of all, is that it's so easy when you've got a show. Most modern VFX films, big budget VFX films, have got 2,000 plus shots in, and if there's one of them that is not perfect, it'll stand out, and everybody will go, CGI, right? Oh, it sucks. CGI sucks, and they'll forget about the other 1,999 shots that are perfect.
Yeah,
and beautiful, and there'll be one. And the thing is it's happened to me too. I'll be in a film and I'll just you'll see one shot, and the thing is that one shot will jump out and hit you in the face. If it's not right, because it's the uncanny valley that humans know when they're seeing something that's not quite right. But the other flip side of that is I think that modern audiences are completely spoiled with the quality of the stuff that they're being given nowadays.
Yeah.
It's mind blowing the quality of the stuff that they're being given. And all you got to do is to say to somebody, go back 20, 25 years or more and have a look at some of the stuff that, was being shown then.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how, I mean, now on both sides, it's amazing how certain films still look mind-blowingly good. Obviously, ones we've talked about, like Blade Runner and Alien and things like that, 2001. Even going back as far, one of my favorites is Bride of Frankenstein.
Nice, yeah, James Whale.
But the visual effects shots in that, I'm like, I don't know how they did that. I'm like, I know it was done with mirrors, and I know it was, but I'm like, this was 1930s. I don't know. I'm I don't know how they did some of those shots. There are shots in there I literally don't know how they did them. But those are the exceptions. For every one of those, I mean, there are some films with visual effects that are, even if they were pretty good budget ones, that look terrible now. You look at them and you're just like, wow, modern audience would just go, just wouldn't even believe that, that it could be. So I think audiences are quite spoiled with the amount and the quality of the effects that they're given these days. And they will still pick on that one shot that isn't 100% perfect.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately that one shot does stand out, and it sucks, if that shot was yours.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, not it.
Yes. So I understand both. I do understand certain things where I'm like, yeah, it does look like a video game, and I wish it didn't. But I do feel that when all is said and done, the quality of what people are getting these days is amazing. But then again, I feel that there sometimes is an over reliance on post and CGI, as we all know. For sort of sloppy filmmaking, and where people don't necessarily want to pre-production enough and research and prep and do things right. They'll just like rush through it and then fix it afterwards. And that doesn't always fix it afterwards. And I'm sure a lot of the you guys and others out there, I mean, still the number one magazine, I call it a magazine, it's really a book, is Cinefex.
Yeah.
Now, Cinefex is still great. The trouble is, Cinefex these days is basically a lot of people sitting in front of computers, pressing buttons and writing code and stuff that they can't tell you about. And unfortunately, it's become a little bit, there's still good stuff in it. But for me, go read Cinefex's from the 80s.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Because that's when you had to be more inventive, you had to be clever. And I think that's why there was a lot of pioneering films that came out of that late 70s through to early 90s films happened, because they didn't have these insane budgets that we have today. You got to remember, what was Star Wars made for? I don't know, 12 million or 14 million or something like that. I think Alien was about 9. Blade Runner was probably a similar amount. And even if you adjust that for inflation, it's like a $50 million film these days. Well, it just wouldn't happen. Now films are 250 million, which is just incredible.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it created inventiveness, and the whole thing I was talking about earlier, which is using the right thing for the right reason for that shot. And when you're doing stuff practical, like you look at practical effects, makeup effects on, say, something like The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing, which is still top level.
Yeah.
But the makeup team would have spent months building, testing, casting, molding, whatever, setting up an animatronic that would have been on screen for 2.5 seconds, and that's it. And that's it, and then the next shot would be a whole other setup that would have been done, for those 2 or 3 seconds, and then another shot that would have been half a second, and then another, and the thing is the amount of work that went into each shot, and it wasn't necessarily money, it was just
time.
Be clever and being inventive. And hiding, the smoke and mirrors, things like American Werewolf in London when he's doing the transformation about, pulling the hairs back into the skin and then playing it backwards to show the hair growing out of the skin. Nowadays somebody would spend months researching some, fiber, hair growing technique to make the skin grow. And it's like, well, no, you could do it simpler. You just pull the hair into the skin and play it backwards. So
simple, it might just work.
Yeah, and the thing is when you look at the Raiders of the Lost Ark, or you look at Aliens, or you look at the original Star Wars, or it's like the thing that makes them iconic and the thing that will make them still iconic in 100 years is that, there's this mix, and there's not an over-reliance on any one particular technique or style. There was, what did we need to do to make that shot work, to make the audience believe it? And they believe it now as much as they believed it then.
Yeah.
And I think they'll believe it as in 100 years, and thankfully there's a few people like Christopher Nolan that are still doing that sort of thing.
Cool. Andy,
well, how are you for time, Lee? Because I don't want to keep you up because you've got that whole work thing tomorrow.
Actually. Yeah. Well, go a little bit longer. I mean, I've
got one more question I want to ask, sort of thing.
Yeah.
But if you game, we might get you back another time, and you can give your full 2-hour spiel about the Galactic event.
Oh yeah, well yeah.
My question was about working on a motion picture director's cut.
Yep.
Because you talked about how with Voyager you went from practical to CG, whereas I'm guessing with a motion picture you had to. It was CG ships you did. You didn't use the filming model, did you? Or did you use the filming model? I don't know. Aha! I'm curious.
then his job is done.
Inquiring minds must know.
Don't pull back the curtain.
No. No. Unfortunately, it was all CG, which is also the reason why the director's cut is not out on Blu-ray, because Paramount, in their infinite wisdom and accounting, money making, keeping it as tight as possible, would not. Okay, so when they basically did the director's cut, they went back to the original film negatives and did a new scan. So there is a new scan. There was a new scan done of the original film negatives. I believe they were done at 4K, and this was a long time ago, so it was a big deal to do them at 4K. But they would, because it was going to be a DVD release, they only allowed us to do the new visual effects, excuse me, at DVD resolution. Even though we sort of pleaded with them to spend about, I think it was 15% more of the budget on the budget to do it at high def or 2K resolution. So at least it would then be sort of future proof. They wouldn't go for it, and so they did a whole new edit. They did a whole new film scan. They did a whole new sound mix. Which and then of course we did the new VFX, which are only available on the DVD version. So hopefully we and the guys that were originally responsible for doing the director's cut have had multiple conversations with Paramount to try and get them to allow us to do the effects again at high def, so that the director's cut can come out on Blu-ray. But yeah, that's been 15 years, and so who knows what will happen. So we only did stuff at DVD, or what's called D1 resolution, and so they were all CGI shots. But we were fortunate enough to actually have access to the original film in miniature. So we did have the original film in miniature brought out to Foundation and was in the back of the shop for about.
While you were trying to argue over whose house it would end up in, was it?
Let's put it this way. I mean, there was many a weekends I could have easily hired a U-Haul and gone down to the office, and it wouldn't have been there on Monday morning. I'm not saying it crossed my mind,
but it did.
But yes. Again, another, you were talking about, what iconic things would I have liked to have worked on? I mean, obviously the motion picture. I mean, the refit design of the Enterprise. I may get shot for saying this, but it did surpass the original TV version.
High five.
Yeah, it's but the thing is, it had to, because the original TV the thing is, the original TV Enterprise it's iconic. It will forever. I mean, it's brilliant. It's perfect, and for what it was for, which was for TV. But the trouble is, if you'd put that on a 60-foot screen, it wouldn't have looked so good. So it had to have this sort of redesign. It had to, and obviously they went, had to go many levels up. And through multiple people who worked on the design of that, of course, Andrew Probert predominantly, Richard Taylor and multiple effects companies, Abel and Trumbull and everybody else. I mean, there was and many more. It went through a lot of people, but the result is obviously iconic. So we had access to the original miniature and basically built a CGI version from that. And so then, the new shots were all CGI. And I've forgotten your original question.
I was just going to say, what was it like working on
that?
In so much as, again, trying to match the CG to those original...
Yeah. And that was one of the fun parts. And one of the parts so on that, there was a small crew working on it. It was basically the Voyager crew working between season 6 and 7. And so there wasn't that many on it. My task, I had two tasks. So the first thing was me and Rob Bonchoon built the CGI version of the Enterprise that was used on that. And I predominantly worked on the dish, on the saucer and the bridge area, because I knew that we were going to see that close up in a couple of shots. And so basically I worked on that and the nacelles, and then Rob did the secondary hull and the support.
Nacelles?
Yeah, I did the nacelles and the bridge and the dish. The saucer, and then Rob did the neck and the secondary hull and the fins that go up to the nacelles.
We know what you mean. Struts.
Yeah. The struts, yes. There's a name for them. I've completely forgotten it. But anyway, so I did that, and then I only did directly a couple of shots, but they were the shots where we were close to the dish. For when they dock with Voyager, and Voyager forms this bridge that they then walk across towards Voyager. And I was lucky. The main shot that I worked on is the one where you see the bridge being formed, and you see them come up on the elevator onto the surface of the dish and walk forward. And that thankfully got to replace a not so good looking shot from the original movie of this really funky looking forced perspective matte painting and set that just didn't work. So I got to replace it. And the reason why I'm talking about this shot is you were talking about what was it like. Well, one of the main things that we were pushed on was to ensure that I'm not saying anything bad about the Star Wars Special Edition, mainly because I know people who worked on it, but because there was some good shots in that. Not all of them, but some of them were really good.
Would you like to point out where precisely?
I'm not going to go there, but anyway. To be very honest, that shot of the Falcon arriving on Bespin, is beauty. I mean, I know it wasn't in the original film, but it's a really nice shot.
Yeah.
But anyway. But one of the things we were told and were emphasized over and over was that the shots that we were doing for the director's edition needed to look like they could have been done in 1978 for the original, release. They didn't want to have any whiz-bang special edition style shots that stood out and looked too good to have been possible to have been done in 1978. And so it wasn't necessarily about toning things down, but it was just making sure that everything fit with the rest of the shots and that nothing really stood out very specific. And so the simplest example that I can give was in that shot where Voyager forms this bridge and you see the dish and you see them come up on the elevator. and they walk out and look at this bridge being formed in front of them. Okay, so in that shot, if you look, there's these little kind of white stars that kind of fly in, and each of those stars comes to a rest, and then it forms one of these bricks of this sort of bridge of these hexagonal pieces. So I did that shot, and what I ended up having to do was the little stars that come flying in. They look too good, and Mojo, who was my supervisor on that show, was like, he's like they're too good. The stars that are coming in, these little stars that are moving in, they're too good. They're too smooth. They're too clean. They're too. Now we could do this; it would have fine. But think about what they would have done in 1978. And in 1978, they would have been hand drawn and hand animated. They would have basically, somebody would have drawn all those stars, gone to the next frame and drawn all those stars in the next position, and gone to the next frame and drawn all the stars, and they would have been hand painted onto film cells and then filmed, onto like they would have done, effects animation on most other films at that time.
Yeah.
So what I did was I was like thinking, okay, how do I make this look more raw, more like done by hand? And the solution was actually very simple. What I did was I basically deleted every other frame and then duplicated the frames that were left.
Oh, animating on twos.
Yes. So basically what it is, if you look at those stars in that shot, when they're coming in, they're flying in, they have this sort of slightly strobic, stuttery appearance. You don't really notice it, but if you'd seen the original where they were nice and smooth, they were just too good. And so those little stars coming in, they're on twos. So they have 2 frames in one position, and then they move, and then they're 2 frames, and then they move.
Yeah.
And it's a very subtle little change, but it was one of those things of just making it slightly rougher, slightly not so perfect, that actually helped make the motion picture new shots that we did, the CGI shots that we did, fit in to this late 1970s film. And so that was, for me, was a really good example and an education in incorporating something in to make it feel believable. And sometimes making it feel more believable doesn't mean making it better and more perfect. Sometimes you got to have those rough edges that just make again, another example. I mean, the CGI Yoda, in the second Star Wars, Attack of the Clones, is amazing. It's absolutely, leaps and bounds better than the puppet that Frank Oz used in Empire. But the puppet in Empire feels more like Yoda.
Yeah.
Feels more believable as Yoda than that incredible CGI Yoda that's in Episode 2. It's cruder. It's much simpler. But it like, that's Yoda. The Empire Yoda is Yoda.
So it's almost like the fallibility and the failings of the model actually bring it to life.
Yeah, exactly. It just when something is just too perfect, and one of the things working in CGI that is always brought up is what's called the CG curse, and breaking the CG curse. And the CG curse is the fact that the computer doesn't understand real world. It just knows numbers, and the trouble is those numbers are perfect, and it doesn't know how to make something rough or how to make something. You have to tell it, and you have to show it, and so you're constantly doing all these things to sort of break that perfectness and add those imperfections that make it feel more believable. And that was,
cool. Okay, Andy, you got anything else, or should we let this man on his merry way?
I think we'll let this man get some sleep. But I really enjoyed it. It was really interesting.
Yeah,
I learned new stuff.
Yes, always be learning.
Always be learning.
Well,
but wait, there's more. Yes.
Yeah. Maybe a part 2. Maybe we'll revisit.
When Lee rambles on for another 2 hours.
Yeah. It's like
don't worry, we can corner him when he's over here for celebration.
Yeah, if you can. Yeah. I'll be coming over in it's only about 3 weeks away now. So.
It is, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I tell you what. One last question, and then we'll let you go. Can I ask you one very quick question?
Yes.
Is there anything that you are looking forward to with sci-fi and spaceships in it in the next 12 to 18 months? Is there anything you thinking, oh, wow, look at that. I really want a bit of that.
Well, I mean, to be honest, that's actually an easy one. I mean, Rogue One. I mean, you know, I'm looking forward to Rogue One more than I was looking forward to Episode 7.
Cool.
Because, and partly because of what we were just talking about with, you know, say, you know, the Yoda from Empire. The thing is that Rogue One has got to go just before Episode 4. And the thing is we all know what Episode 4 looks like and Empire looks like, and we all know what, you know, the vehicles look like and the ships look like. But they've still got to make it look new and modern. But it's literally taking place, you know, the week before Episode 4.
Yeah.
And so they can't do too much, you know, to vary from that established look, but they've still got to make it look modern, fresh, new, and exciting.
It was great in the trailer when you see the Star Destroyer.
Yeah.
It's got the same kind of white sheen and the yellowish sort of lights that the Episode 4 has.
Yeah, it looked like a miniature, even though I know it's a CG model. I mean, it looked, you know, personally, I'm not keen on these, you know, stealth fighter SWAT stormtroopers because they look a little bit too modern. But you know, I'm waiting till the film comes out. But I think Rogue One, you know, is going to be. I'm really hopeful that it's going to be fun because I'm hoping that it's a you know, a new, modern, exciting film with a lot of, you know, the new whiz bang, but it's got to fit into that timeline from 1977 and not feel out of place. The thing is you know, they're saying, and I don't know too. I've tried to stay away. I knew a lot more about Episode 7 before it came out than I wanted to, but for Rogue One, I know, again, I got friends who worked on it, but for Rogue One, I've actually been staying way away from it as much as I can because I really want to enjoy it as a film. And the thing is that they're saying that it ends 10 minutes before Episode 4. Like, literally, it ends probably with the blockade runner being chased by the Star Destroyer.
Nice.
So the thing is you should be able to sit down and watch Rogue One and then watch Episode 4 right after it. And they've got to fit together. You know, it can't stand out too much and be too different. So I'm excited to see what they're doing. And I'm very optimistic that they've pulled it off.
Brilliant. Well, that's great. Thank you very much, sir.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Anytime.
Okay. So, we've been talking to Lee Stringer. He's been brilliant. We'll have him on again, I'm sure.
you can come and defend the Galactica when we get around to doing that.
Yeah.
Oh right, yeah. When you want to blow it up, or
that's it.
Yes,
yeah.
yes. So, happily so. Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for putting up with me, and thank you for anybody who's still listening. So.
Yeah, well, no, I'm sure everyone is still listening, and brilliant. Well, thank you very much again. Thank you for taking part. Thank you to everyone who's listening. And, it just leaves me to say thank you very much, and we'll see you all next week. Until then.
And it's good night from Lee.
And it's good night for Lee. Oh, fuck it up.
All right.
You had one job, Medcalf. One job.
I fucked it up. Raptors in the kitchen.
Raptors in the kitchen. People died.
Oh, he's fucked it up. You know, never try and finish a podcast with a pen in your mouth.
His gag, yes.
Okay, and with that, I'll just slink off stage left while a little hook comes out and just yanks me off the stage. Okay, then. See you later, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Space Dock Jury is a production of 3 Angry Beards for GeekPlanetOnline.com.